to Consider It Blacklit. I am Kim, your host, and for those of you tuning in for the first time, Consider It Blacklit reviews movies, television programs, and stage plays that feature African Americans both in front of the cameras and behind the scenes. We will also discuss social issues as it relates to some of these productions and how they may or may not impact our communities. So thank you for tuning in, and we hope you continue to tune in each week. Today, we will be discussing the documentary Althea. It is about Althea Gibson, the first African American to not only play, but win at Wimbledon and US Open in women's tennis. It was done at a time when tennis wasn't commercially viable, so she struggled financially throughout her life, as well as dealing with social issues related to being an African American woman that played in a sport that was perceived to be predominantly white. Let's take a look at the clip.
Did you find in getting to the top of the tennis world that you had any real great obstacles because of your race?
No, I don't think that there are any obstacles as far as race is concerned.
She was a street kid. Althea came to tennis, an aggressive female that had to learn how to survive.
It was very intimidating when she walked on the court. She basically scared the hell out of a lot of the girls.
Everyone could feel her presence. She'd walk in a room, you'd feel her.
It was the mecca of tennis, and it was something that was very alien to us.
Everything was white. The balls, the clothes, the people, the socks, the shoes, everything.
People had never seen a black player before, and they didn't know black people could play tennis.
She just wanted to play. Just let me be one of you. And unfortunately, in the 50s, it just wasn't that easy.
We jumped up. It was a frightening experience. To see an axe through your door is a frightening thing.
She was pressured to be more outspoken, but she wanted to be a person who did it through her racket.
Black people had no use for her. Then she had to quit. She had to stop playing tennis, and she was clearly the best player in the world.
The tennis world definitely turned their back on her.
And she was neglected by everybody.
I can't hang around any longer, she said. Life really doesn't seem worth winning, so I'm just saying goodbye to all my friends.
She is a product of our city. She came up the hard way and now stands at the top of her class. She reached the top not only because of her natural athletic ability, but because of her unwavering courage and determination to be a champion.
So today our guest is Gilliam to help us discuss the issues related to the documentary. Gilliam is a longtime friend of mine, but he also is the executive director of strategic partnership for the Althea documentary. Welcome, Glenn.
Great to be here, Kim. I'm so excited to be one of your first guests. Really excited to be here.
Well, thank you. So before we dive into the film, why don't you explain to the audience exactly what an executive director of strategic partnership does for the documentary?
Sure. Basically, I'm involved with all the collaborations that we do on the tour with special events or tour partners, our underwriters, our sponsors. That's the primary job in terms of making that nexus between corporate underwriting and giving a life to the tour so that we can afford to bring guests in and have Rex Miller, the filmmaker, come out and join us for the screenings.
Oh, that's great. So what was your motivation to do the tour, and tell us how it's been received?
Well, you know, the motivation for me, I mean, I'll just say quickly, I met Rex at the American Black Film Festival where he won the Grand Jury Prize for Best Documentary. And I had been dying to see something done on Althea Gibson for a long time. I was so grateful to have seen the movie with him. And then we talked about it, and the opportunity to bring it to other schools and other corporations to give it some exposure was paramount for Rex. It's been received extremely well. considering the climate that we've been in the last couple of years, the real message of the movie about diversity and how pioneers can break through and make a big difference has really resonated with our audience.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Now, I know people who have heard of Althea Gibson know she's this great tennis player.
Yeah.
But why don't you tell us about her background before she started playing tennis, and actually how did she get into it?
Sure. Well, she was born in the South, in Silver, South Carolina. And her family, her father owned about 5 acres. They were sharecroppers, and they harvested cotton. Unfortunately, they couldn't make any money doing that, and her father was very upset about the fact that the white landowner was not giving him what he thought was a fair price for his cotton. So he packed up his family. They were part of the Great Migration. They moved up north to Harlem. They moved up to New York. And really, she became really engaged with the street life. She was a street kid. She made a lot of friends. Luckily, the block that she grew up on was one of the play blocks, what they called the Police Athletic League, had games set up all over the block. So right in front of her house was a great tennis net, and they played paddle tennis. And her and her girlfriend would get on the court at sunup, and they wouldn't be beaten all day, and they'd be there till sundown. So that's where she got her love of tennis.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
It was incredible.
Yeah. You know, I saw the documentary, and I learned so many things that I didn't know about her.
Sure.
One of them, she used to be a singer, and she actually made an album.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think she was known for the singing part, but the fact that she actually did it was awesome. Tell us something that you learned about her that you didn't know, because you're this great historian. I've been knowing you forever, and you have all these little facts. I mean, you need to be on trivia shows.
Oh,
but
thank you.
Tell me something that you've learned about her from the movie that you didn't know before.
Yeah, well, just to comment on that singing, I mean, she appeared on Ed Sullivan, needless to say, and, you know, was part of that kind of retrofitting a new career because of the fact that, as we talked about, tennis wasn't open at the time, and she couldn't make money as a professional, really, in the sport. So she ended up reviving a number of careers, including breaking into to professional golf. But what I learned about primarily was not as much about Althea specifically as the milieu in which she came up through the ranks before she broke into Major League Tennis, which was the American Tennis Association, was the black tennis association. And what a lot of people probably don't know is it's the first sports organization founded by blacks in America in 1917, and actually this year is the 100th anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's one of the really, I just want to say, one of the critical things about bringing this tour to new audiences. It's to give everybody a little bit of that history, because the American Tennis Association is trying to establish its permanent home, hopefully in Florida. They're going to be celebrating this summer their 100th anniversary, and also talking, and we might get into it a little bit, but Dr. Johnson, who was very famous, he was the first Dr. J, Dr. Robert Johnson out of Lynchburg, Virginia, who trained her and Arthur Ashe. They're trying to preserve his foundation, the Whirlwind Foundation, and his son, Lance Johnson, as you'll see in the documentary, he gives his little testimony about the impact of Althea and working with his grandfather. But it's really that history that I think a lot of people don't know, that she was mentored by Sugar Ray Robinson, you know, that she had these influences that most people probably aren't aware of, but those were really exciting points for me.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I learned a lot about, you know, just because it's, like I said, it's perceived to be, back then, this predominantly white sport.
Definitely.
But African Americans have been playing it. They formed their own organizations. They formed their own clubs. And that was one of the great things that I got from this movie. And I think it's important that a lot of young people see it, to see what we did back in the day when we didn't have the resources and things, we didn't have access to things.
Well, that's what's great about this, is because it talks about this middle class, this upper middle class, these doctors who basically nurtured the sport from the white community that they had access to and brought it back to their own community. So it was what they call the bourgeoisie, the intelligentsia, but what they had access to, they brought back. And it was a little different for Althea because she wasn't used to that. So there were social graces, there were genteel activities that she wasn't really prepared for at first, and that offered up a little confrontation. So it didn't quite fit as well as she would have liked at first, but she had to learn that through Dr. Johnson, Dr. Neil Eaton down in North Carolina. And once she was able to get over that hump and learn about some of those social graces and how she would comport herself on court, she became successful and really took off.
Yeah, that's awesome. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the filmmaker Rex Miller, and what is his connection to Althea and what motivated him to make the documentary?
Well, that's a real interesting story, and Rex is always best at telling it, but I'll give my best shot at it. And it's a great story because Rex comes from a tennis family. He's a tennis player and you know, accomplished in that realm. But he lived in Queens, and when he grew up, in his bedroom was a picture of his mother and another woman, a brown-skinned woman. He later found out that that was Althea Gibson. His mother had a chance to compete against her, didn't win, got dusted off the court. But you know, he always wondered, you know, why he hadn't known more about this woman, who we found out was an incredible champion, the first one. And like many people who think Arthur Ashe might have been the first African-American, when he found out about Althea's history and her legacy, he decided that he really wanted to put that story out there and share that information with everybody. And thank God he did. But he's an incredible director. He's a great photojournalist. And he's actually shooting his wife's show. His wife is a chef. He shoots her show. He's also in the process now. He's done a number of documentaries before this one, but he's in the process now of shooting an Arthur Ashe documentary, which I'll speak on a little bit later. But it's really something that has been a passion for him, and I'm just excited that we've had a chance to work together.
I know David Dinkins was an early follower of Althea Gibson. Could you tell us a little bit about his involvement with tennis for those of us who don't know?
Sure. I'll try to give you the short version, but when Althea came of age where she could actually start playing with the elite players in New York, it was at the Cosmopolitan Club on 145th Street, I believe. I may have that wrong, but it was uptown in Harlem. It was an exclusive club. David Dinkins was one of the members, and he first, I think, encountered Althea there.
Right. You know what? For people
yes.
who may
Sure.
be under a rock and don't know who David Dinkins is, why don't you tell?
Needless to say, the first and only, unfortunately, black mayor of New York City, the Honorable David N. Dinkins, who I am just dying to mention every time I can, that he's the reason that the US Open enjoys its bedrock of a home in Flushing Meadow now. It used to be in Forest Hills as the U.S. Nationals, and at the time there was a lot of turmoil about the Open possibly leaving New York. David Dinkins not only secured the new home in Flushing Meadow, but he made it possible that the airlines would have to reroute their planes so they weren't flying overhead.
I remember that.
And that was a big deal. And you know, it's one of those things, once again, a part of American history, a part of African American history that doesn't get talked about enough, and he has not received, in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of people, especially fans of the game, he doesn't get enough credit for what he did, and he really should have his name as a tribute there at the US Open. Maybe that will come sooner.
Maybe it still can happen.
Yeah, that can still happen. But that's a big, big deal. And that was what was so important about, I think, really telling this story so that the other people who were around the champion get their due. You know, Buddy Tucker, who was a band leader who brought her to the Cosmopolitan Club. Obviously her influence from Sugar Ray Robinson, the championship boxer at the time. But David Dinkins, just an important, influential person who could advocate for the game, as well as he has his jungle here in New York, where he opens it up to young kids. The Harlem Junior Tennis Association in Harlem, that Katrina Adams, who still is the president, just to say for folks who didn't know, she was reinstated as president of the USTA for another 2-year term, which is incredible. I don't think that's ever been done before, but that's exciting to continue to have her presence there. And the last thing I did want to mention is that Serena Williams, who as a member of the media, I had a chance to go to the US Open for a few years and cover it, and I was honored and lucky enough to give Serena her copy of Althea DVD, and she tweeted about it literally the following week, encouraging people to watch the PBS broadcast.
Wow.
So she's a big fan, and I'll just have to say quickly, in a number of her big interviews in Vogue and in Cosmopolitan, she and Elle magazine, she has mentioned the fact that if she could play anybody living or dead, she'd love to play Althea Gibson.
Wow. That would be awesome.
That would be amazing.
Awesome
no question. Yeah, the legacy lives on.
The legacy lives on.
No doubt.
So why don't you tell me a little bit more about some of the producers on the documentary?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Kim, because one of the great things in terms of Rex putting together this executive producing team is that he got people from all walks of life, and most importantly, the likes of Billie Jean King, of course, who's an icon within the sport and was a contemporary for a short amount of time with Althea Gibson. But somebody that may not be associated with tennis, of course, is John Amos, our famous father from Good Times, James.
Good times,
yeah, I know.
time you need it.
Needless to say, and I mean, John Amos grew up in East Orange, New Jersey, which was Althea Gibson's home before she passed, and so when he got involved, because he had seen Althea play for a long time, right there in his neighborhood, and he decided that he wanted to make this film because this was important piece of education that he wanted to take to school kids all over the country. And that's really was a legacy part that most of the producers got involved. They wanted to make sure that this history was passed on because it's not being taught in schools. And unfortunately, as we've seen with a lot of things, I mean, Hidden Figures, which recently opened, that is something that we've missed out on. And unfortunately, there haven't been enough documentaries made for all the stories that need to be told. But this is an important one, and we're really glad to take it out to the people.
Oh, great. So with that leads me into what's next on the tour for Althea.
Sure. We've got a great 2017 planned. Hopefully you guys can join us if you're out there. But one of the highlights is going to be the new Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. For African American history and culture. And we're planning for a late summer screening there, which is going to be highlighted by a few things. The American Tennis Association is having their 100th anniversary in Baltimore at the time. So we're going to try to overlap some of those dates so that everybody can participate. But that's going to be a real VIP, a really big bang there. And we're planning on having a VIP showing on the evening and then opening it up to the public for screening during that weekend. We're also going to be at the Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's going to be very exciting. And, you know, the usual course is going to take us through a number of universities: West Virginia, Alabama State, Florida Memorial, which is Arthur Ashe's actually alma mater where he taught. He went to UCLA, obviously, as undergrad, but we're really excited about bringing it to the colleges. And we've developed a study guide that we're going to use for not only elementary kids, but have an advanced study guide for university level students. So we can talk about a number of the things that are prevalent today, whether it's the use of the N-word and where that kind of rubs folks the wrong way, so that young people can understand what the legacy there is, and also talk about, obviously, all the complexities with the social issues that were existing at the time.
Exactly, exactly. What is one of the biggest issues that stood out for her? I know that there was some friction between some of the blacks of the era and Althea and, you know, accepting, you know, some of the things that she did. Definitely.
Well, I mean, you know, this was the kind of burden that was thrust upon you if you had a chance to actually excel in your field of endeavor. Althea didn't want to be Jackie Robinson. She was considered the Jackie Robinson of the country club sports because she excelled in tennis and then ultimately in golf, which were exclusively white, almost. But she didn't want to be someone who had to speak about these issues. She wanted to let her game and her talent speak for itself. And breaking barriers was great, but that's not what she set out to do. She just wanted to show that, hey, I belong, and I can play with you, and I can beat you. And as Althea mentions herself in the documentary, her style was aggressive and also mean, because she had that streak. And I think one of the things I had mentioned to you off camera earlier was that her father trained her to be tough, and he used to take her up to the roof on their apartment building in Harlem and actually box with her, put on boxing gloves, and fight with her to toughen her up. One of the many experiences that, I'm sure led to her on-court demeanor, which allowed her to be a champion and really break a lot of barriers. There's just so much in the movie, as you can tell. I'm still excited about it as many times I've seen it. It's just it's a revelation, and it's just an important story that we're glad that's being told.
Yeah. Tell me what you feel about, I know when I was watching the documentary, I noticed that, some blacks who were more in the political arena, because she had the visibility, wanted her to take a certain stand, and she felt uncomfortable about it. What's your take on that when people are visible like that, in terms of taking a stand for, African Americans and making a political statement with their fame?
Well, look, we've got obviously this past year has been big. Colin Kaepernick showing his colors, the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. What was considered controversial, obviously, that he would take a knee at the playing of the national anthem because of his concern about black lives and showing his solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. Some people aren't built that way. Jackie, as we refer to Jackie Robinson, thankfully was able to speak eloquently about the tribulations of his community and talk about it in a way that made a difference. Althea, I don't know if she felt equipped to do it, but more importantly, I think she just felt like this is something, if some good comes of it, fine, but she wasn't going to go out of her way. And that definitely concerned a lot of the people who were supporting her. And I think it was tough for her to accept some of that support for a long time. And consequently, it probably led to some of the hardships she dealt with after her professional life in tennis. But that was something that was, it's a real burden and a choice that not everybody makes. As we talked about a little bit with before, Serena Williams, who now has Nike with a campaign called Equality, and she's been the spokesperson and the face of that. And it's really getting to the heart of the fact that women's equality, minority equality, all the things that we're dealing with even presently in the political climate that we have, are really talking about the fact that diversity and equality is so critical to bringing all people to the table. Not everybody can speak about it. Some will excel with their talent and show the way and break through. And that's what Althea did.
Right. She definitely did that. So where can people get access to the documentary if they want to see it? If they woke up in the middle of the night and was like, okay, I want to see it right now. Where could they find it?
Well, the great thing is that we've got it loaded on Vimeo, which everybody has access to. But you can rent it for a nominal fee, I think of about $3.99, or you can buy it. And that's a little more expensive, but it's been on Vimeo now for a couple of months. We're also going to have access to the documentary, which I did bring with me, but I don't have in my hand right now. But as you can see, we have some premiums that will be available.
And where can I get that t-shirt?
I know, this t-shirt's the joint because on the back of it, it has that hashtag Althea came first. So it's definitely a unique piece of property out there. And we hope everybody will come to our website, altheafilm.com.
Yes, and we're going to put it up on the screen so that you can see where you can have access to the documentary and possibly get a cool shirt like this.
Exactly.
Yes, I'm waiting for my gift.
No question.
Okay.
That's coming quickly.
Yes. So is there any closing remarks you'd like to add about the documentary? Anything that we haven't covered that you want people to know to get them excited about going to the website and seeing the documentary?
Definitely. A couple of things. One is that and I mentioned Hidden Figures before. I think it's just so important that, number one, women are getting the kind of credit and recognition that they deserve because they've broken so many barriers. Like you said, Arthur Ashe's wife, who has the last line in the film, is the one who first coined Althea came first, because she's always reminding folks when they ask her, they always believe that Arthur Ashe was the first, but she says no. 10 years before Arthur Ashe came on the scene, Althea had broken through. She had actually broken through in 1950 to play in the US Open, or what was called the US Nationals at the time. But she actually won her first tournament at the US Open in '57. So this is actually the 60th anniversary of that victory, which is huge. But one of the things I definitely wanted to mention in terms of the upcoming documentary that Rex Mill is working on Arthur Ashe, it is talking about the year of 1968, which is pivotal for so many reasons. Of course, we know that Dr. King, unfortunately, was assassinated that year along with Robert Kennedy. It's probably one of the most pivotal watershed years in American history, and that was the year that the US Open became the US Open, Arthur Ashe won the very first one, and he realized in that moment that he had a voice and a platform bigger than just himself. So he needed to step up to the plate and actually use that voice to help his community. So look for that documentary in 2018. It's going to be a barn burner. It's going to be great. And we're really looking forward to getting it out into the festivals and then bringing it to a local venue near you.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, that's our show for today. Make sure you tell everybody you know about the Althea documentary. We're going to show on the screen where you can get access to it, especially our young people. Definitely. We all know about Serena and Venus Williams, and Althea opened the door for the Williams sisters. Remember, Althea came first. Hashtag Althea came first. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, consider yourself Blacklit. Thank you.